America didn't know it yet, but the most important day of the entire Pacific War wasn't Pearl Harbor, and it wasn't the day the atomic bomb was dropped. It was a quieter day. A day with no parades, no headlines, and no sense of celebration. It was the day America finally realized that Japan could be defeated, the moment when the psychological balance flipped and the impossible suddenly became inevitable. And it didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in a cramped, overheated intelligence basement in Hawaii, where a small group of cryptanalysts were staring at a sequence of numbers that made no sense at all, until they did. In the months after Pearl Harbor, America lived in the shadow of humiliation. The Pacific Fleet was smashed, the Philippines were collapsing, Wake Island had fallen, and British prestige in Asia was destroyed. It felt like Japan was unstoppable, and they wanted everyone to believe exactly that. Their navy had more experience, their pilots were better trained, their ships were faster, and their commanders were far more aggressive. To the outside world, Japan looked like a machine designed to win. Japan had seized almost every strategic point across the Pacific. They were deep into the Dutch East Indies. They were threatening Australia. They were preparing something big, and no one in Washington knew where the hammer would fall next. But inside the basement of Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, one man refused to accept that Japan's codes were unbreakable. His name was Joseph Rochefort. He wore a kimono and slippers, worked all night, barely slept, and muttered to himself like a man drifting into madness. But there was method in the madness. Rochefort was decoding fragments of the Japanese naval code JN-25, a monstrous system built from thousands of numbers that changed regularly. Every analyst in Washington believed the code couldn't be broken in time to matter. Rochefort didn't care. He believed that the war would be won or lost in the shadows long before ships met in open water. By early May 1942, Rochefort and his team could read enough fragments to follow conversations. Not whole sentences, not detailed plans, but shapes, shadows, patterns. They kept seeing one mysterious reference: AF. Something was going to happen at AF. Messages spoke of supply shortages at AF reinforcements to AF, a major operation involving AF. But what was it? The analysts in Washington believed AF was the Aleutian Islands. Others thought it meant Fiji. Some thought Hawaii itself. But Rochefort's instincts said something different. He believed AF was Midway, an isolated atoll in the middle of the Pacific, barely worth a glance on a map, but priceless to anyone who understood logistics. Midway was the door to Hawaii, and Hawaii was the door to the entire American Pacific. If Japan took Midway, they would have a frontline airbase capable of threatening Pearl Harbor again. America's heart would be exposed. But belief wasn't enough. They needed proof. So Rochefort came up with a trick so simple it felt like a prank. He told Midway's commander to send a fake radio message in plain English, no encryption, stating that Midway's water purification system had broken and the island was running out of fresh water. Hours later, Japanese naval signals suddenly crackled with a new message: AF is short of water. That's when the room fell silent. It was the confirmation they needed. AF was Midway. Japan was coming. And now, for the first time since the war began, America knew exactly where and when the Imperial Navy would strike. This was the moment. Not a battle, not a victory, just a message, just a tiny crack in Japan's armor. But psychologically, it changed everything. The United States finally had an advantage: knowledge. And in naval warfare, knowing your enemy's next move is the same as beating him. Admiral Chester Nimitz didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for more intel, or more code-breaking, or more confirmation. He trusted Rochefort completely. That decision would determine the future of the Pacific War. Nimitz ordered his 3 available aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to rush to Midway and wait in total silence. No radio messages. No movement detectable by Japanese scouts. America was about to ambush an enemy who had never been ambushed before. Japan, meanwhile, believed the Americans were broken. Their pilots had shredded China. Their navy had crushed the British. They assumed the US fleet was still recovering from Coral Sea. They believed they had the perfect plan: lure America into a trap, destroy the remaining carriers, and end the war in a single blow. They had no idea that the Americans already knew every detail of their operation. On June 4, 1942, the Japanese attack on Midway began exactly as predicted. Bombers roared over the island, smashing fuel depots and airstrips. American planes scrambled to defend it, but most were destroyed. From Japan's perspective, everything was going perfectly. They believed the American carriers weren't there. They believed victory was already in their hands. Then everything changed in an instant. As Japanese commanders rearmed their planes for a second strike, they received a shock. American aircraft were spotted heading towards the fleet. It was impossible. America wasn't supposed to be here. There weren't supposed to be any carriers left. Suddenly, the perfect plan was collapsing under its own weight. Japanese ships scrambled to launch fighters. Deck crews panicked. Munitions lay scattered. Fuel lines ran across the decks like veins waiting for a spark. First came the torpedo bombers, brave, suicidal, and completely outmatched. Japanese fighters cut them apart. Torpedo Squadron 8 was destroyed almost to the last man, but their sacrifice pulled Japanese fighters down to sea level and threw the fleet into disarray, and at that exact moment, American dive bombers appeared from above, like the sky cracking open. The timing was so perfect, historians still argue whether it was luck, fate, or divine intervention. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. Explosions tore through their hangars. Pilots who had dominated every battlefield until now watched their ships sink before their eyes. The Japanese Navy had never experienced anything like this. Their confidence, bordering on arrogance, was shattered. Japan's last carrier, Hiryu, fought back fiercely, damaging the Yorktown. But by the end of the day, Hiryu too was burning. 4 of Japan's 6 main carriers, the heart of the Pearl Harbor strike force, were gone. The pilots were gone. The maintenance crews were gone. The Naval Air Corps that had taken decades to build vanished in one battle. Japan could never replace them. America could replace everything. For the first time since the war began, Japan knew defeat was possible. And for the first time, America knew victory wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. But what mattered most wasn't the ships lost or the pilots killed. It was the psychological shift. Midway proved something the world didn't believe just 6 months earlier: that America could outthink Japan, that America could strike first, that America could fight back even when outnumbered and outgunned. This was the day the fear broke, the day America stopped surviving and started winning. Before Midway, America was reacting. After Midway, America was hunting. Every month after that battle, Japan grew weaker. America grew stronger. Carriers rolled off American shipyards like products from an assembly line. Pilots graduated faster than Japan could train replacements. Submarines strangled Japan's oil supply. Marines captured island after island using a strategy Japan couldn't adapt to. Everything after Midway was momentum. Japan's empire no longer looked invincible, it looked desperate. Inside Japan's high command, the reality hit hard. Intelligence officer Ryunosuke Kusaka reportedly said that after Midway, the war was lost without question. Admiral Yamamoto himself, the architect of Pearl Harbor, fell into deep gloom. Japan had gambled everything on one decisive victory, and they lost it. But America didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. They felt something more powerful: confidence, a belief that their enemy could be broken. Midway didn't end the war, but it ended Japan's aura of invincibility. It ended the myth that America was too slow, too naive, too inexperienced to stand up to a veteran imperial power. The tide hadn't turned slowly, it had snapped, and all of it happened because a handful of cryptanalysts in a basement figured out what AF meant, because Nimitz trusted them, because American sailors and pilots were willing to attack an enemy they feared but no longer respected, because one day, for the first time since Pearl Harbor, America finally realized that the Pacific War could be won. And from that moment on, Japan was fighting a losing war.